I'm Bob Abbott with Alarca Realty and Property Management, and we currently manage homes throughout the Charlotte, North Carolina, and surrounding areas. I'm also the current president of the Charlotte chapter of the National Association of Residential Property Managers. And today we're going to talk about evictions and why landlords often lose evictions, particularly in Mecklenburg County, but many of these topics will pertain to other counties in North Carolina as well. We regularly receive phone calls from do-it-yourself landlords who are having problem evicting their tenants. And quite often this is simply because the tenants know more about the eviction process than the landlord does. Professional tenants are always going to prefer to rent from an individual homeowner as opposed to a professional property manager because they realize that the individual homeowner has other things going on in their lives and they're not going to be able to drop everything and go file eviction paperwork or follow up properly with repair requests or document as much as the professional property manager will. So there's just the first hint for you is make sure you're doing your background checks before you let the tenant into the home. The number one reason that homeowners lose evictions that we see is simply that they're not filling out the required notices or the required paperwork properly. So again, in North Carolina, you're required to provide a 10-day notice to your tenant before eviction is filed, unless your lease waives this notice. Now, many of the leases available on the internet do not have this clause in there. Any of the professional property managers are going to have the clause that waives the notice requirement. But if you have not waived notice, you need to make sure you're providing that proper notice to pay rent or quit, or demand for payment notice. And these have to be in a specific format and they have to have specific wording, or the magistrate will very likely throw out the case before you even get to the next step. We also see a number of evictions dismissed just because the landlord doesn't have the proper documentation. So when you show up in court, you want to make sure you have copies of any notices you've provided, copies of any letters or emails to and from the tenant, copies of any receipts showing any repair work. You certainly want to have the copy of the lease and the ledger with you as well. So the magistrate is going to want to see all of those things. And if you don't have those, the magistrate is going to throw the case out. You also want to make sure your ledger is easily readable by the magistrate and that it's very clear. So we've seen cases thrown out simply because the ledger was so difficult to understand that the magistrate couldn't really make heads or tails of it and really understand that the tenant was making a payment in this month that was for 3 months ago. So you want to make sure that's laid out very clearly and you spend some time doing that. Probably the most frustrating scenario for a landlord is they do all of this properly and then the tenant shows up and makes some complaint, whether true or made up, but the landlord again doesn't have the proper documentation or evidence to back up the claim that that's false or that it has been taken care of. So we've seen cases get thrown out for no smoke alarm in the home when the landlord is certain that smoke alarms were in there before the tenant moved in, no CO detectors, all the way up to claims of mold or other items in the home. So you want to make sure that you have documentation related to any of those things. You want to make sure that the home is in good shape. And if there are any maintenance requests or repair requests that have been made, you want to make sure you have copies of those and that you have documentation that you've dealt with them. So how do you ensure you win the eviction if you're going to get to that point? So the first thing to do is make sure you're obeying all of the laws. If you're breaking the law for any reason, whether knowingly or unknowingly, it's very likely your case will get thrown out. We've seen them get thrown out for late fees that were in excess of state law, or NSF fees that were in excess, or the landlord tried to barge into the home, change locks, or something along those lines. So you want to make sure that's being taken care of. Secondly, you want to hire a reputable eviction attorney. If you don't want to try and do this yourself, the eviction attorney is going to be well worth the money. If you don't want to go that route, you can also hire a property manager to manage the home through this process. most property managers work with a reputable eviction attorney that can help you out. Please call us if you have any questions about this. These scenarios get very complicated and everyone is unique, and you need to make sure you're taking care of them the right way.